I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. So special counsel Jack Smith got a major win last week in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in connection with his criminal investigation of Donald Trump. We briefly covered what transpired in the Court of Appeals, but not within the context of how this is very beneficial to special counsel Jack Smith's criminal investigation of Donald Trump and ultimately what I believe are the charges that are going to be brought against Donald Trump. And let me just give you the background. So just first and foremost, the Court of Appeals decision that I'm referring to is that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals reversed a lower court's ruling. The lower court, a federal judge by the name of Carl Nichols, who was appointed by Donald Trump, who had previously made a ruling in a case involving 3 insurrectionists, that the Department of Justice could not bring charges in their indictment for obstruction of official proceedings. And Judge Carl Nichols gave a very tortured analysis of the obstruction of official proceedings statute, which could be found at 18 U.S.C. section 1512 C2. That's the United States Code section where this charge of obstruction of an official proceeding is found. And Judge Carl Nichols, again a Trump appointee, said that this specific section only relates to the destruction and mutilation of documents. Therefore, if an insurrectionist was otherwise impeding or preventing the certification of the electoral votes, but that the insurrectionist was not like physically destroying records and shredding records, Judge Carl Nichols said that you couldn't charge that insurrectionist with an obstruction of an official proceeding charge. And I think Judge Carl Nichols, again, a Trump appointee, in making that ruling was really trying to do Donald Trump a favor. Why do I think this? 1, Carl Nichols is a Trump appointee. 2, his analysis was so utterly absurd. And 3, ultimately, who would be the beneficiary of perhaps the main charge that you would bring against Donald Trump? Obstruction of official proceedings. Now, if Judge Carl Nichols' ruling was affirmed and not reversed by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, what would have happened actually is not just would the Department of Justice not be able to charge the 3 very violent and despicable insurrectionists who were at the heart of the case where Judge Carl Nichols ruled the Department of Justice couldn't bring that charge, but actually the hundreds of other cases where obstruction of official proceeding charges were brought would actually be dismissed as well, and the Department of Justice would be prevented from bringing those charges in the future if the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ultimately ruled that the obstruction of official proceeding charge only related to the destruction and mutilation of physical records. Here, let me just pull up the statute so you can just read it for yourself, and I'll just explain to you why Judge Carl Nichols' ruling made no sense. If you look at the statute, 18 U.S.C. 1512C says the following: whoever corruptly alters, sub 1, alters, destroys, mutilates, or conceals a record, document, or other object, or attempts to do so with the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in an official proceeding, or sub 2, otherwise obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. And the Trump appointee in the federal courts in D.C., Judge Carl Nichols, unlike all of the other judges there, basically ruled that C sub 1 is the only thing that controls here, and you just ignore subsection 2, which talks about otherwise obstructing, influence, or impeding any official proceeding or attempting to do so, which is what the insurrectionists were engaged in. And the court said, really, no, what really controls is just subsection C1, which is the altering, destroying, mutilating, or concealing a record or document. And the Court of Appeals ultimately reversed that ruling. And it was a very close call, though. It wasn't a per curiam or unanimous decision by the Court of Appeals. It was a 2-1 decision, and there were actually 2 Trump-appointed judges on that panel. And so I was frankly a little bit nervous what that D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals was going to do, but ultimately you had a Democratic-appointed judge, Judge Florence Pan, who convinced one of the Trump-appointed judges on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Justin Walker. Judge Justin Walker, very, very young. He was born in 1982. He's already on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. He was one of these, and I think he'd admit it, less experienced lawyers who Donald Trump put on the bench because they were very young. I don't think he had any trial experience. But the other judge, the third judge, Judge Gregory Katsas, basically ruled the same way Judge Carl Nichols did, that you couldn't bring an obstruction of official proceedings. So it ultimately was a split decision, but a split with the majority in favor of the fact that you can bring this obstruction of official proceeding. And if you read between the lines in this order, Judge Florence Pan, the Democratic appointed judge, ultimately convinced Judge Justin Walker that, hey, you're just going to look ridiculous. And you're a young judge, and your entire judicial career is bigger and broader than Donald Trump, so you should make the right ruling here. And obviously it doesn't say that in the ruling itself, but if you read between the lines, that's likely what took place behind the scenes here. Now, ultimately, the insurrectionists can try to appeal this to the United States Supreme Court, but it's hard for anybody to rule differently than just literally what the statute here says that I just read for you. So this is a very bad decision, though, for Donald Trump, and a very good decision for Special Counsel Jack Smith. Why? Because the obstruction of official proceeding charge carries with it a 20-year prison sentence, and undoubtedly it is likely going to be one of the charges that ultimately Jack Smith charges Donald Trump with. It is clearly one of the crimes that is being investigated, and Donald Trump attempted to obstruct an official proceeding through multiple methods, whether it was through fake electors, whether it was through inciting the insurrection, whether it was by calling and threatening state and local election officials, whether it was by improper and unlawful conduct that he was engaging in through his various political action committees and arms. His whole goal, his whole design was to do just that, was to obstruct an official proceeding. So you go back to Judge Carl Nichols and you go, what a weird ruling for Judge Carl Nichols to make. Like, what a tortured analysis. Why would Judge Carl Nichols, a Trump appointee, make that ruling? Well, Judge Carl Nichols was trying to, I think, remove one of the main charges for the person who appointed him. He was trying to remove one of the key charges that Donald Trump could ultimately be charged with. I don't think Carl Nichols had a great deal of love for these insurrectionists, although you never know with all of these MAGA Republicans who are now singing in the January 6th choir with the terrorists. They're putting out songs and CDs with the January 6th terrorists. But just so you know, like, I'll give you an example of one of these insurrectionists. This individual, Joseph Fisher, belonged to the mob that forced Congress to stop its certification process. On January 6, 2021, he encouraged rioters to, quote, charge and hold the line, had a physical encounter with at least one law enforcement officer, and participated in pushing police. Before January 6th, he allegedly sent text messages to acquaintances stating, "If Trump don't get in, we better get to war. Take Democratic Congress to the gallows. Can't vote if they can't breathe. LOL. I might need you to post my bail. It might get violent. They should storm the Capitol and drag all the Democrats," he spelled it DEMOCRATES, "into the street and have a mob trial." And so that was one of the individuals who Judge Carl Nichols threw out the most powerful of the charges against him. The other charges still remained, but the obstruction of official proceeding charge was thrown out, and then the Department of Justice ultimately appealed that. So you see what was really kind of taking place. And this is why I want you to think about the broader context of these cases and the various kind of machinations behind the scenes, because in many ways, this appeal was one vital to making sure the Department of Justice could continue to bring obstruction of official proceeding charges, and that all the other obstruction of official proceeding charges would not be reversed. What a disaster that would be if all of the insurrectionists who were convicted and pled guilty already would have those charges reversed because a Trump-appointed judge ruled that you can't bring those claims. So the good news is that those claims and those charges from those indictments are not reversed, but kind of the proxy fight, if you will, here was the bigger battle. Donald Trump. That special counsel Jack Smith is criminally investigating Donald Trump's obstruction of an official proceeding, and here the Trump judge was trying to knock out the ability of Jack Smith to do that, and Jack Smith and the Department of Justice were fighting for their ability to continue to bring that charge through all the insurrectionists, including all the way up to the top. And, you know, look, this is why I say, while I agree with everybody who wants this process to move along quicker, it takes time because you have all of these impediments and roadblocks, not self-imposed by special counsel Jack Smith, but are being put up by the forces of authoritarianism, by the, Trump supporters, by people who would look at a statute that you saw, right? 1512C2. I mean, you've seen what it literally says, and basically come to a conclusion that that's a charge that the Department of Justice can't bring. It's also why elections are so important, because remember, the appointment power of judges is with the president, and the Senate confirms. And so Donald Trump, he was able to put in power people like Judge Carl Nichols, people like, for example, the three of the right-wing Supreme Court justices, which is the reason why Roe v. Wade was overturned, not because of Democrats, okay? It was because three right-wing justices Trump appointed to the Supreme Court, because that's the president has the ability to appoint. You want to talk about Judge Kaczmarek, the judge from the Northern District of Texas, a Trump appointee who just ruled that the abortion pill is unlawful and issued a nationwide injunction. Fortunately, an Obama-appointed judge from the state of Washington, Eastern District, said, "What are you talking about? No, I'm ordering the FDA to keep the abortion pill legal because it's been proven to be safe and efficient since the year 2000. What in the world are you doing, Judge in the Northern District of Texas?" But it's why elections are important. But it's also important why we here on the MeidasTouch Network talk about these different maneuvers going on behind the scenes so that you fully understand the process. And not just you, because you, by watching MeidasTouch Network and Legal AF and all our shows, probably get it now. But so you can explain to friends and family members and coworkers and colleagues and neighbors what goes on. So because it's not a both sides issue. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 1.5 million subscribers thanks to your incredible support. So please hit subscribe right now. Also, check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. We have lots of great exclusive memberships there with exclusive content. We're not funded by outside investors at all. So our whole funding for this whole operation is through Patreon mostly. That's like one of our main sources. Also, the merch at store.MeidasTouch.com is an example. But it's free to subscribe here. It's free to subscribe to our audio podcast when you search the MeidasTouch podcast. So check us out. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas. Thank you so much for watching.
Lock him up! Indictment season is upon us. Celebrate with the new Indictment season t-shirt and v-neck exclusively at store.MeidasTouch.com.